If you ask a survivor what a tornado sounds like, they almost always give you the same answer. It's a cliché. You've heard it 1,000 times. They say, "It sounded like a freight train." It's the universal shorthand for chaos, a low, rumbling roar, a vibration you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears, a train coming off the tracks. But on November 17th, 2013, in a small town called Washington, Illinois, the sound was different. Survivors there didn't talk about trains. They didn't talk about the low rumble of a locomotive. When Josie Glancy was crouching in her hallway, pressing her body against the floorboards as the world disintegrated above her head, she didn't hear a train. She heard a machine. Specifically, she heard a chainsaw. If you listen to the audio she captured that day, and it is some of the most terrifying audio ever recorded in a disaster zone, you don't hear wind, you hear grinding. It is a high-pitched mechanical scream. It is the sound of millions of Took C4s, thousands of oak trees, and tons of asphalt shingles being pulverized against each other at 190 miles per hour. It sounds like a wood chipper, only the wood chipper is 3/4 of a mile wide, and it is feeding on an entire subdivision. Welcome to Washington, Illinois. We are about to walk minute by minute through one of the most violent meteorological events of the 21st century. We are going to deconstruct the Sunday morning normalcy bias that nearly wiped a town off the map. We are going to look at the radar data that showed something impossible, and the forensic timeline of a disaster that shouldn't have happened in November. This is not just a story about wind. This is a story about the psychology of the false alarm. Because in 2013, we had better radar, better sirens, and better smartphones than ever before in human history. We had the technology to see the monster coming from counties away. So why, at 11:06 a.m., did the monster catch so many people standing in their living rooms? Why were they still making coffee? Why were they still watching the pregame show? To understand the tragedy of Washington, you have to understand the air. You have to understand the loaded gun that was pointing at the Midwest. On a day when everyone thought they were safe. If you want to understand the physics of disaster and the dark history of the storms that shape our landscape, listen closely. We are entering the impact zone. It starts with the calendar. November 17th. In central Illinois, deep in the American Corn Belt. Mid-November is usually the beginning of the gray season. The harvest is done. The corn stalks are cut to stubble. The earth is hard, cold, and waiting for the first snow. You expect frost on the windshield. You expect to see your breath hang in the air when you walk out to get the Sunday paper. You expect heavy coats and wool scarves. But on the morning of Sunday, November 17th, 2013, nature was playing a trick. The sun rose on a day that felt wrong. It wasn't cold. It was hot. Uncomfortably hot. By 8 a.m., the thermometer had already climbed past 60 degrees. By 9 a.m., it was pushing 70. The air was heavy. It was thick. It was that sticky, humid air that you associate with a barbecue in July. Not a Sunday morning, just a week before Thanksgiving. If you stepped outside in Washington that morning, you felt the moisture clinging to your skin. Meteorologists call this the November witch. It's a rare, volatile setup where the seasons collide. You have the cold, dense, aggressive air rushing down from the Canadian Arctic, clashing violently with a plume of hot, moist, unstable air surging up from the Gulf of Mexico. When these two air masses meet, they don't mix, they fight, and the battlefield was Illinois. Kurt Zare knew something was off. Kurt is a hog farmer. He runs a farm just outside of Washington. When you work the land, when your livelihood depends on the weather, you develop a sixth sense for the atmosphere. You feel the barometric pressure in your joints. Kurt was out tending to the pigs that morning. It was a routine Sunday, chores, church, family. But the wind was already howling. It was gusting from the south, warm and aggressive. It was whipping the barn doors. It was stripping the last of the dead leaves from the trees. It felt energetic. That is the word meteorologists use, energy. The atmosphere is an engine. It runs on heat. And on this particular Sunday, the engine was redlining. To understand just how dangerous this atmosphere was, we have to look at something that happened hours before the first siren wailed. We have to go to the National Weather Service office, where they launched a weather balloon at dawn. Usually, a weather balloon drifts up lazily. It bobs and weaves through the lower atmosphere, sending back data about temperature and dew points. But on this morning, the data. Coming back from that balloon was terrifying. Imagine the balloon rising. At the surface, the wind is blowing hard from the south. But as the balloon rises, as it hits 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet, the wind doesn't just get faster, it changes direction. It starts screaming from the west. This is called wind shear. And on November 17th, the shear was off the charts. If you were a particle of air rising that morning, you would be twisted, you would be spun. The atmosphere was essentially a giant blender, waiting for someone to flip the switch. But on the ground, in the subdivisions of Washington, it just felt like a weirdly warm day, a bonus day. People were wearing t-shirts, they were washing their cars, they were opening the windows to air out the house before the winter really set in. It was the perfect disguise. The monster wasn't hiding in the dark, it was hiding in the sunlight. Let's talk about the normalcy bias. It is a psychological state that affects all of us. When we are in a familiar environment, when we are surrounded by the things we love, our brains refuse to accept that mortal danger is imminent. We assume that today will be just like yesterday. And in Washington, Illinois, nothing screams normalcy quite like the Chicago Bears on a Sunday. It was week 11 of the NFL season. The Bears were playing the Baltimore Ravens. Kickoff was scheduled for noon. Think about the rhythm of that morning. In thousands of homes, the rituals were identical. Fathers were checking their fantasy football lineups. Mothers were starting lunch. Chili, roasts, Sunday comfort food. Kids were playing video games or running around in the unseasonable warmth. Church services were letting out around 11 a.m. The parking lots of the Methodist and Baptist churches were full of people chatting, shaking hands, commenting on the wind, maybe holding on to their hats, but smiling. Crazy weather we're having, huh? Yeah, feels like spring. Go Bears. It is impossible to overstate how safe these people felt. They were in their homes. They were in their sanctuary. But miles above their heads, the cap was breaking. In meteorology, a cap is a layer of warm air high in the atmosphere that acts like a lid on a pot of boiling water. It holds the energy down. It prevents storms from exploding. But when the pressure gets too high, or when a trigger comes along, the cap breaks. And when the cap breaks on a day with this much energy, the atmosphere doesn't just storm, it detonates. At the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, the experts were watching the screens with a growing sense of dread. They had done something rare. They had issued a high-risk outlook. If you follow weather, you know that high risk is a phrase that makes your blood run cold. It is the highest level of threat the government can issue. It is reserved for days when catastrophic, violent tornadoes are not just possible, they are expected. Usually you see high-risk days in Oklahoma in May, or Alabama in April. You do not see high-risk days in Illinois in November. It was a statistical anomaly. It was a black swan event. But a text forecast on a screen is abstract. It's just words. High risk. Particularly dangerous situation. PDS watch. Unless you are a weather nerd, those words don't mean much. They certainly don't mean grab your kids and get into the basement right now. So, the people of Washington went about their Sunday. Kurt Zaire finished up with the hogs. Families in the Georgetown Commons subdivision, a quiet neighborhood of well-built modern homes, settled in for the game. The clock ticked past 10:30 a.m. The wind outside picked up a notch. The trees started bending a little further. The sky to the southwest began to darken, turning a bruised purple-gray color. But nobody panicked. Why would they? It's just a thunderstorm. We get them all the time. And that is the trap. 10:50 a.m. 16 minutes before impact. We are now in the critical window, the time frame where life and death are decided by seconds. On the radar screens at the National Weather Service in Lincoln, Illinois, a cell exploded. It formed near East Peoria. It wasn't a line of storms. It was a supercell, a discrete rotating thunderstorm that feeds on its own energy. Almost immediately, the radar signature went specifically, horrifyingly wrong. Technicians look for a hook echo. Imagine a comma shape on the radar. The top of the comma is the rain, the hail, the heavy stuff, but the bottom of the comma, that little hook that curves inward, that is the rotation, that is the mesocyclone. At 10:50 a.m., the hook on the radar wasn't just defined, it was tight, it was coiled. The radar beam was detecting wind moving away from the station and wind moving toward the station, in a space smaller than a city block. It's called a velocity couplet, and this couplet was glowing bright red and bright green. Red for outbound, green for inbound. When those two colors touch on the screen, it means the air is spinning, and this air was spinning at over 100 miles per hour, and it hadn't even touched the ground yet. This is the moment where the warning goes out. The sirens began to wail in East Peoria, then in Washington. But here's the problem with sirens. We hear them all the time. We hear them for tests on the first Tuesday of the month. We hear them for severe thunderstorm warnings that turn out to be nothing but a little heavy rain. We hear them for tornadoes that end up landing 5 miles away in a cornfield. Sirens are binary. They are either on or off. They don't communicate intensity. A siren for a 60-mph gust of wind sounds exactly the same as a siren for an EF4 monster. So, when the sirens went off at 10:55 a.m. in Washington, many people didn't run, they walked. Some of them walked to the window. Anthony Khoury was one of them. He was in his home, looking out the glass door into his backyard. He saw the sky turning dark. He heard the sirens. But he didn't run to the basement, not yet. He pulled out his phone. This is a modern instinct. I need to see it. I need to capture it. Anthony Khoury was about to record one of the most famous videos in the history of severe weather. But he didn't know that yet. He just knew the sky looked weird. And he wasn't the only one. Across the town, people were pausing. They were looking up from their televisions. They were stepping out onto their porches. They were looking for the funnel, but they couldn't see it. And this is the terrifying part of the Washington story. This is the detail that keeps meteorologists awake at night. The tornado was rain-wrapped. Remember that high humidity? That moisture from the Gulf of Mexico? It was so thick. The air was so saturated that a curtain of heavy driving rain was wrapping itself around the tornado. To the naked eye, looking southwest from Washington, you wouldn't see a sharp black funnel dropping from the clouds like you see in the movies. You wouldn't see the Wizard of Oz. You would just see a wall of gray. A gray wall, moving at 60 miles per hour. It looked like rain, just a heavy downpour. But inside that rain, concealed by the deluge, was a vortex that was grinding the earth down to the bedrock. 10:59 a.m., 7 minutes to impact. The tornado touches down. It lands about 2.4 miles southeast of East Peoria. It starts small, a narrow rope of violence. It tears through some trees. It knocks down some power lines. But then, it inhales. The dynamics of an EF4 tornado are hard to comprehend. It is not just wind. It is a vacuum. It is a straw sucking at the surface of the earth. As it crossed the open fields toward Washington, it widened. It grew from 100 yards wide to 200, to 400, to a half mile. And this is where the radar technology showed us something that stopped the hearts of the forecasters in Lincoln. Do you remember I mentioned the hook echo, the shape of the storm? Well, modern radar has a feature called correlation coefficient. It's a fancy term, but what it does is very simple. It tells you the shape and size of the objects in the air. Raindrops are uniform. They are roundish. They look the same to the radar beam. But houses, cars, trees, insulation, those are irregular. They are jagged. They tumble. At 10:59 a.m., a new color appeared on the radar screen, a dark blue ball right in the center of the hook. It is called a debris ball. The meteorologists watching the screen knew exactly what that meant. It meant the radar was no longer reflecting off of raindrops. It was reflecting off of physical objects. It was bouncing off of 2A4s. It was bouncing off of siding. It was bouncing off of family photos. It was bouncing off of kitchen tables. This wasn't weather anymore. This was a solid mass of human life, lofted, thousands of feet into the air. And it was getting bigger with every sweep of the radar beam. The debris ball is the signature of a killer. It is the undeniable proof that the monster is on the ground and it is eating. And at 11 a.m., that debris ball was pointed directly geometrically perfect, at the heart of Washington, Illinois. The timeline is compressing now. 11:02 a.m. The tornado crosses Interstate 74. It tosses semi-trucks like toys. It strips the bark off of trees, not breaking the branches, stripping the bark. That requires wind speeds in excess of 160 miles per hour. 11:04 a.m. It is 2 minutes away. In the Georgetown Commons subdivision, the power flickers. The TV screens go black. The Chicago Bears game vanishes. Now, finally, the sound arrives. It isn't the train. It isn't the rumble. It's the chainsaw. It starts as a buzz, a vibration in the windows. Then it grows to a roar. Then it becomes a physical pressure in the ears. Glenn Schultz is in his home. He has a disability. He moves slowly. He hears the noise. He tells his wife to go. "Get downstairs," he says. Chris Lancaster is in his dream home. He's only lived there for 2 years. He looks out the window and sees the fence rip out of the ground. Josie Glancy is grabbing her family. Anthony Khoury is still filming. In his video, you can see the black mass filling the window. You can hear the panic in his voice rising. He starts to pray. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The wind outside is now screaming at a pitch that doesn't sound earthly. 11:05 a.m. The siren on the pole near the subdivision spins one last time, and then is ripped from its mounting. The warning system is dead. The phones are dead. The power is dead. There is no more data. There are no more forecasts. There is only the monster and the frail wooden boxes that people call home. The debris ball has arrived. The normalcy bias is shattered. The Sunday rituals are over. For the people of Washington, Illinois, the world as they know it is about to end, and it is going to happen in exactly 60 seconds. This is 11:06. There is a specific moment in a disaster, a psychological tipping point, where the brain switches from curiosity to survival. For Anthony Khoury, that moment happened inside the lens of his smartphone. He is standing in his living room. The glass door to the backyard is a frame, and inside that frame, the world is changing color. It isn't gray anymore. It's black, a deep, bruised, violent black that seems to be eating the light. If you watch the video he recorded, you can see the wind whipping the trees. You can see the debris starting to fly. At first, his voice is steady. He's narrating. He's witnessing. "There's the tornado," he says. He sounds almost impressed. He's watching a spectacle. But then, the frame changes. The debris isn't just flying past the house, it is flying at the house. The black mass in the distance isn't staying in. The distance, it is growing. It is expanding. It is filling the entire field of view. The realization hits him like a physical blow. This isn't a picture. This is a weapon. And then, you hear it. The shift. He doesn't scream. He doesn't run. He starts to pray. "Our Father, who art in heaven," his voice trembles. It cracks, but he keeps speaking. "Hallowed be thy name." Outside the glass, the wind has become a blur. You can't distinguish trees from fences anymore. It is just a horizontal torrent of matter. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." The sound on the video is deafening now. The roar is overwhelming the microphone. It is clipping the audio, turning it into a distorted, static scream. "On earth as it is in heaven." And then, the lights go out. The reflection in the glass vanishes. The room plunges into shadow. The only light comes from the monster outside. He is still filming. He is still reciting the ancient words. But now, the monster is at the door. It is a terrifying thing to witness. A man facing his own mortality, holding a glowing rectangle of glass, speaking to God while the devil hammers on the walls. He captures the exact second the pressure drops. Your ears pop. The air inside the house is suddenly sucked out through the vents, through the chimney, through the cracks in the windows. The house is trying to breathe. Anthony Khoury finally turns. He finally runs. He dives into the hallway, just as the glass behind him explodes. 11:06 a.m. impact. This is the minute that Washington, Illinois, ceased to exist as a functioning town. We are going to slow this down. We need to understand the physics of what is happening to these homes. A house is a system. It is a box held together by nails and gravity. It is designed to withstand rain. It is designed to withstand snow. It is designed to withstand wind gusts of maybe 80, 90 miles per hour. It is not designed for 190. When the eye wall of the tornado hits the Georgetown Commons subdivision, it doesn't just push the houses over, it dissects them. First, the garage doors fail. They are the weakest point. The wind punches them in. They buckle. They fold like wet cardboard. Once the garage door is gone, the wind rushes into the garage. It has nowhere to go. It traps the air inside. The pressure builds instantly. It pushes up. The roof over the garage lifts, just a few inches at first, then feet. Then, it peels back. It peels back like the lid of a sardine can. Once the roof is gone, the walls have no support. They are just vertical sheets of drywall and wood, standing in a 190-mile-per-hour slipstream. They collapse. But they don't fall in, they are sucked out. This happens in seconds. Inside the Glancy home, Josie is huddled with her family. They are on the floor, and this is where the audio she recorded becomes the soundtrack of nightmares. You hear the chainsaw sound reach its peak. It is a grinding, mechanical screeching. Then, you hear the structure failing. Crack, snap, tear. It sounds like bones breaking. It sounds like the house is screaming in pain. The walls around them are vibrating so hard they blur. The air is filled with insulation, that pink, fluffy fiberglass. It's everywhere. It's in their mouths. It's in their eyes. It coats everything like a gray snow. And then, the roof lifts. Imagine looking up from your hallway floor, expecting to see your ceiling fan, and instead, you see the sky. You see a dark swirling vortex of debris where your attic used to be. You see your furniture, your bed, your dresser, being lifted up into the air as if gravity has been reversed. This is the suction of the vortex. It is a vacuum cleaner the size of a skyscraper. In that moment, the roar is absolute. You cannot hear yourself scream. You cannot hear the person next to you. You can only feel the vibration in the floorboards, shaking your internal organs. Miles away, at the Zare farm, the experience is different, but just as violent. Kurt Zare's wife, Sue, and their son, Michael, are in the basement. The farmhouse is old. It's sturdy. It has stood on this land for generations. But the tornado doesn't care about history. As the funnel passes over the farm, it grips the house. Sue and Michael are huddled in the dark. They hear the roar. They hear the crash of timber. Above them, the farmhouse is being erased. Not just damaged, erased. The second floor is ripped off. The first floor is ripped off. The floorboards above their heads, the only thing separating them from the storm, are being scoured by debris. The tornado is so strong here, so violent, that it is stripping the carpet off the floors. It is sucking the dirt out of the crawl spaces. It is pulling the very nails out of the wood. This is the power of an EF4. It is not just wind. It is a force that disassembles reality. For 4 minutes, the machine grinds. It chews through Georgetown Common. It chews through the apartments. It chews through the farm fields. It takes everything. Cars are lofted into the air and thrown hundreds of yards. They are wrapped around trees like aluminum foil. 2 Oaks 4s are driven through concrete curbs. Straw, pieces of dried grass, are driven into telephone poles like nails. The physics defy explanation. And then, as quickly as it started, the roar begins to fade. The grinder moves on. The machine heads northeast toward Long Point, leaving a scar on the earth that you can see from space. 11:10 a.m., the wind drops, the rain stops, and then comes the sound that every survivor remembers more than the roar, the silence. It is a heavy, suffocating silence. There are no birds, there are no cars, there are no sirens. The sirens are gone, twisted into pretzels on the ground, or thrown into the next county. There is no hum of electricity. The grid is dead. For a few seconds, nobody moves. They are waiting. Is it coming back? Is that just the eye? But the sun starts to peek through. The November witch has passed. Slowly, tentatively, people begin to uncurl from their hiding spots. They push debris off of their legs. They cough the dust out of their lungs. They wipe the insulation from their eyes. Josie Glancy looks up. She is alive. Her family is alive. But when she stands up, she gets dizzy. Not from injury, but from disorientation. She is standing in her hallway. But there are no walls. She can see her neighbors. She can see the entire neighborhood. It's all flat. It looks like a bomb went off. It looks like a war zone. There are no landmarks. The street signs are gone. The trees are gone. The houses are mulch. She steps over what used to be her front door. She walks out into the yard. The air smells strange. It smells like fresh-cut lumber, that pine scent. It's the smell of thousands of shattered trees. It smells like natural gas. The lines have been ripped out of the ground. It's a hissing, sulfurous smell, and it smells like wet insulation. But amidst the relief of survival, there is horror, because not everyone made it to the basement. Glenn Schultz, the man with the disability, the man who told his wife to go downstairs without him because he couldn't move fast enough. The silence in his house is different. His wife calls out from the basement. "Glenn?" No answer. "Glenn?" Nothing. She climbs up the stairs, or what is left of them. She emerges into the daylight. The upper floor is gone. The spot where Glenn was sitting is gone. He was caught in the teeth of the machine. This is the cruelty of the storm. It is random. It is unthinking. One house is flattened. The house next door has a few missing shingles. One person walks away without a scratch. Another is taken. In the silence of 11:11 a.m., the reality sets in. The adrenaline wears off. The shock takes over. People start to wander. They look like zombies. They are covered in gray dust. They are bleeding from small cuts they don't remember getting. They walk out into the streets that are no longer streets. They are looking for their cars. They are looking for their dogs. They are looking for their phones. But mostly, they are just looking. They are trying to process an image that their brains cannot compute. My house was here, they think. I built it. I lived in it. It was solid. Now, it is a pile of sticks. At the Zaire farm, Kurt Zaire is miles away. He is in his truck. He felt the storm pass. He saw the black cloud. He grabs his phone. He texts his wife. "You okay?" Nothing. He waits. "Are you guys okay?" Nothing. The towers are jammed, or the towers are down. He drives toward the black scar on the horizon. He doesn't know yet that his farmhouse is gone. He doesn't know that his wife and son are trapped under the debris of their own home. Alive, but buried. He just receives one text message from a neighbor. It is one word: hit. That is the terrifying efficiency of the digital age. Hit. It doesn't say everyone is safe. It doesn't say the house is gone. Just hit. Kurt presses the accelerator. Back in Washington, a man wanders into his front yard. He is dazed. He looks down at the grass. There is a doorknob sitting in the mud. It's a brass doorknob. Shiny, pristine. But there is no door attached to it. There is no house attached to it. It's just a doorknob, waiting for someone to turn it. This is the surrealism of the aftermath. The logic of the world has been broken. And as the survivors of Washington stand in the ruins of their Sunday morning, they realize something else. It's getting cold. The heat, the 70-degree anomaly that fueled the monster, is being sucked away behind the storm front. The temperature is dropping. The wind is biting. Winter has arrived, and they have no walls to keep it out. While the people of Washington were stumbling out of their basements, staring at a world that had been turned into a gray wasteland, something strange was happening 120 miles away. It is a 2-hour drive from Washington, Illinois, to the suburbs of Chicago. It is a different world, different weather, different day. In the town of Lockport, and in the frantic hustle of O'Hare Airport, the sky was gray but calm. The wind was breezy but not deadly. But then it started to rain. Not water. Paper. A woman walked out into her backyard in the Chicago suburbs. She saw something fluttering down from the clouds. It landed on her lawn. It was a photograph. A physical, glossy photograph. The edges were tattered. It was wet. She picked it up. It showed a family smiling at a birthday party. She didn't recognize them. Then another piece fell. A canceled check. Then another. A recipe card. A page of homework. For miles across the Chicagoland area, the sky was returning what the monster had stolen. This is the paper debris phenomenon. It is one of the eerie signatures of a violent tornado. The updraft, that vacuum in the center of the storm, is so powerful that it acts like a cannon. It launches light objects into the upper atmosphere, 30,000 feet up, into the jet stream. There, in the freezing, thin air, the family memories of Washington, Illinois, traveled at hundreds of miles per hour. They flew over the interstate. They flew over the cornfields. They flew over cities that were completely unaware of the tragedy unfolding to the south. And then, when the updraft finally weakened, they drifted down. Imagine holding that photograph. You are standing in safety. You are safe in your yard. But you are holding a piece of someone else's disaster. It is a ghost story told through litter. Back in Washington, there were no ghosts. There was only the mud. The survivors call it the gray landscape. When we think of debris, we think of piles of wood. We think of colors. Bricks are red, siding is white, sofas are blue. But an EF4 tornado is a blender. It doesn't just stack debris, it pulverizes it. It shreds the insulation inside the walls into billions of tiny fibers. It mixes that fiberglass with pulverized drywall, with pulverized dirt, and with pulverized leaves. The result is a thick gray paste. It coated everything. It coated the trees that were still standing. It coated the cars. It coated the faces of the survivors. It looked like a nuclear winter. Josie Glancy described it as walking on the moon. You step out of your shelter, and you don't know where you are. Is this my street? Is that my neighbor's house? Where is the road? The landmarks are gone. The street signs are twisted into metal ribbons or buried under 3 feet of sludge. And the silence I mentioned before, is starting to break, but not with sirens. It breaks with the sound of names. Mom, David, Sarah, voices calling out in the gray fog, people climbing over the mounds of splintered wood, cutting their hands on nails they can't see, desperate to find the people they love. While the human search began on the ground, the scientific search was beginning from above. In the days following the impact, meteorologists and surveyors descended on Washington. They needed to know exactly what happened. They needed to quantify the violence. They rate tornadoes on the enhanced Fujita scale, EF0 to EF5. It isn't based on wind speed measurements because the wind instruments are usually destroyed. It is based on damage. They look at a house. Roof gone, EF2. Walls collapsed, EF3. House swept clean off the foundation, EF4. But in Washington, they found something that pushed the needle to the very limit. They looked at the farm fields outside of town. Usually a tornado tracks through the mud. It leaves a path. But this storm didn't just walk on the mud. It scoured the earth. When they looked at the satellite imagery, and when they walked the fields, they saw cycloidal marks. Imagine taking a giant invisible claw and dragging it through the soil in loops. The wind was spinning so fast. The suction was so intense that it stripped the topsoil. It dug trenches into the hard-packed clay of the Illinois farmland. These striations, these swirls in the dirt, are the fingerprints of extreme violence. To scour the earth like that, to dig those trenches, you need wind speeds exceeding 180 miles per hour. You need a vortex that is acting like a drill bit. This evidence confirmed it. This was a high-end EF4, 190 miles per hour, just 10 miles per hour short of an EF5, the finger of God. And yet, as the surveyors walked the path, they found miracles amidst the math. They found the voids, a house completely leveled, except for one closet. And in that closet, a family of 4, untouched. A car thrown 300 yards and wrapped around a debarked tree, but the baby seat inside was intact, and they found the Zaire family. Kurt Zaire finally made it to his farm. The drive that usually took 20 minutes took him hours. The roads were blocked by power lines, by trees, by parts of other people's houses. When he turned onto his property, his heart stopped. The farmhouse, the structure that had anchored his family for generations, was gone. It wasn't just damaged. It was scattered across the county. He ran to the pile of rubble that used to be the foundation. He shouted, and from deep within the wreckage, from the darkness of the basement hole, he heard a voice. "We're here." Sue and Michael, they were covered in dust. They were shaken. They were terrified. But they were alive. The floorboards had held. The debris had piled up over them, creating a shield rather than a tomb. Kurt pulled them out. They stood there, a family reunited on a patch of dirt where their life used to be. They had lost everything material, the clothes, the furniture, the photos. But they had the only thing that mattered. They had the heartbeat. As the shock wore off and the grief set in, the question changed. People stopped asking what happened and started asking why. Why November? Why Illinois? Why us? The November witch is a cruel teacher. It reminds us that the calendar is a construct. The atmosphere doesn't care what month it is. It only cares about physics. On November 17th, 2013, the atmosphere was a loaded weapon. We had the cap that held the energy down, allowing it to build and build and build. We had the record-breaking warmth, the fuel. We had the wind shear, the spin. It was a perfect storm of variables, a mathematical equation that solved itself in the form of a monster. But there is a deeper why. Why did so many people survive? More than 1,000 homes were destroyed in Washington. Entire neighborhoods were erased. And yet, the death toll in Washington was significantly lower than it could have been. One fatality directly in the tornado's path in town. Why? Because of the warning. Because of that debris ball on the radar. Because of the meteorologists who saw the high risk and screamed it from the rooftops days in advance. Because of the sirens that wailed, even if people hesitated. Because of the cell phones that buzzed. In 2013, technology won a battle against nature. It didn't stop the destruction. You can't stop the wind. But it bought time. It bought the 10 minutes that Anthony Khoury needed to stop filming and run. It bought the 5 minutes the Glancy family needed to get to the hallway. It bought the seconds that Glenn Schultz tried to use to save his wife. The tragedy of Washington is not that technology failed. It's that even with the best technology in the world, nature is still faster. Nature is still stronger. And sometimes, 11:06 a.m. just arrives. In the weeks that followed, the gray landscape began to change color. It turned orange. Washington strong. It became a slogan. Then it became a hashtag. Then it became a movement. Bright orange t-shirts appeared everywhere. Thousands of volunteers descended on the town. They weren't FEMA. They weren't the government. They were neighbors. They were strangers from the next town over. They were farmers with backhoes. They were football teams from rival high schools. They came to shovel the ash. They came to pick up the debris. They came to find the photographs. A Facebook page was started. Washington IL Tornado. Documents found. Thousands of people posted pictures of the debris they found in their yards. The checks, the photos, the letters found 120 miles away. And thousands of people in Washington claimed them. That's my prom photo. That's my dad's recipe. It was a digital lost and found that reconnected the pieces of a shattered community. Kurt Zaire rebuilt the farmhouse. It took time. It took grit. But today, the farm stands. The hogs are there. The family is there. The scar on the earth has healed. The corn grows over the trenches where the tornado scoured the soil. If you drive through Washington today, you see new houses. You see young trees. You see a town that refused to be erased. But if you look closely, you can still see the shadow of the monster. You see it in the way the trees are all the same age. You see it in the way the locals look at the sky when the wind shifts in November. You see it in the eyes of the survivors when a siren testing day comes around. They pause, they listen, they remember. Nature is beautiful, and nature is terrible. It gives us the harvest, and it sends the grinder. It gives us the warm breeze, and the November witch. We build our boxes, we live our lives, we plan our Sundays. But we are always just guests here. The sky cleared by noon on that Sunday. The sun came out. The Bears game went on. The world kept turning. But for the people of Washington, the calendar stopped. Part of them is still standing in that hallway. Part of them is still hearing the chainsaw. Part of them will always be at 11:06 a.m. This has been a production of Stay Safe and keep your eyes on the horizon.